Hey guys, you're listening to episode 167 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Keelan, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Cody. What would you do if God asked you to give something you could never get back? In 2021, Ray Chung was faced with that very question when he sensed God inviting him to donate one of his kidneys. For more than 2 decades, Ray has been focused on recentering the hearts of people and teams. As a senior consultant at Rising Sun Consultants, he equips organizations to build healthy cultures shaped by servant leadership and spiritual formation. Raised in Malaysia, now based in Pennsylvania, Ray's story weaves together faith, mission, and deep conviction. If God's been challenging you to release something in your life, this episode is for you. Before we get started, I just want to ask one big favor of you guys. If you've been listening to the show for some time and want to support what we're doing, one very easy and free way to do that is to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Just write whatever you like about the show and you'll help others find us. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the show so you're the first to know when new episodes come out. And with that, let's get started.
All right, we're excited to have Ray Chung joining us today. Ray, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here. What an honor.
Why don't you get us started and tell us a little bit about what life was like growing up and tell us about your spiritual background as well.
Yeah, first and foremost, just want to say thank you for having me. Have been just binging on these episodes on Finish Line podcast for quite a bit now. So yeah, I was born and raised in Kuala Lumpur, KL, Malaysia. Dad and mom, my brother Roy is in the medical field like you, Dr. Keelan, and he's 3 years older than me. I have a younger sister, 6 years younger. Her name's Rachel. She's a pharmacist. So as you can tell, they are both in the healthcare field, and somehow I'm the black sheep. So earlier on, I grew up in my grandma's apartment while both my parents were working. And my grandma is just someone that I've just appreciated, learning a lot from. From a faith perspective, perhaps like some listeners, I probably said the sinner's prayer a bunch of times, just in case somehow God didn't hear me fully for the first several times. But surely, like many, there were several pivotal moments and individuals that God had used. I started attending Sunday school around age 6 or 7. There's a Sunday school teacher. Her name's Auntie Mui Mui, and she's utterly the sweetest, caring, loving, quintessential textbook Sunday school teacher. She loved on me and she cultivated a love for scripture. She would have snacks in the class and checked in with each student, whether it's how's your week. And I remember one of our activities that was a keychain like Bible memory verse written on each key, if you would, that's made out of paper. And that really stuck on me. And, at a young age, I just remembering memorizing scripture matters. About age 12 at a church camp, the youth pastor who was invited to speak at the church camp, his name is Pastor Sivan Kit, and we're still friends till to this day. I remember him inviting us to do a foot washing thing. And just as it would be for us today, I remember back then, man, this guy is a little bit out there. His bold faith, his authenticity, I just remember peppering him with all sorts of questions, right? Like, if God is good, why does evil exist? And he did not give like cliche Bible responses, right? Like, just read the Bible, pray, and you'll be good. I remember poignantly that he challenged me, even at age 12 at the youth camp, to not have a mediocre faith, to have a fervent faith, that God desires our very best. And pragmatically, he put it this way. Some people might think that going into seminary or missions because perhaps your grades are not good enough, or perhaps this is a backup option. Obviously, being mindful of the danger of secular-sacred divide, what Sivan was emphasizing then was that when we have the best grades or even the most prestigious resume, what does it look like? How is it that we respond with the posture of surrendering and offering to live our life boldly and fully for Jesus?
So I'm curious to hear with, this sounds like pretty solid faith background growing up. What did that start to look like as you kind of got out on your own, start getting into career, out into the world? How did this start to play out in your life?
Yeah, earlier on, I've already been grappling with the idea of what is the intersection of faith, business, and social impact look like. My dad ran his own business for a number of years. On my mom's side, family as well, they also had family business. Some of my earliest memories, including going to my dad's office, and my uncle Mike is my dad's younger brother. They all work together in that family business. Uncle Mike had polio when he was age 5, and so he has lost the majority functioning of his both legs quite earlier on. Yet I remember him moving those motorcycles around to set up the shop on his crutches by himself. I remember, visiting my mom's side family business. My grandma would bring lunch down to my aunt, my uncle, my cousins every day at lunchtime. We've gotten to know Uncle Norden, who worked for my aunt's business on that side, or Madam Chu on my dad's side business, and many others as just part of close family friends. So earlier on, I already saw, and perhaps maybe didn't even have the words at those times at a younger age, I saw the power of business, the power of job creation, the power of community impact, and I was drawn to it. A number of years ago, I came up with this definition of the theology of work. That is, work is a channel of grace to display the glory of God in meeting our needs, ours and our neighbors, as we generate resources that can be shared in the redemptive work of the gospel. And that has just continued to be an anchoring point of how I think through work as I've continued to, embark on the people that I meet in how we address challenges around us and just, how I spend my days.
So, Ray, I know that you spent some time with Hope International, but tell us about what led to your decision to move to the United States and then how you got involved in ministry.
Yeah, I get that question a lot about the Hope chapter of my life. So I came to the US in 2001. My degree from Messiah University was in international business and a concentration in economic development. And at that time, I took classes that delve into business as missions. During college, even did a summer 12-week course that we visited Western Europe, Russia, Ukraine, and visited organizations like Philips, Nestle, European Central Bank. Those experiences affirmed the idea that business can be a powerful force for God's transformation. So like I mentioned earlier, job creation, commerce, the production of goods and services that lifts up community, creating vibrant, healthy organizational cultures. That is ministry. That is God honoring. There is spiritual and physical impact in that. I joined Hope in 2011. I sometimes joke that I marked my tenure by ways of Peter's books. So at that time, there was only one book with Peter's name on it. Prior to that, I had already been working a number of years at a consulting firm and a multinational firm. I must say, perhaps for me, and maybe it's just me, that at that time I had a preconceived notion of what nonprofit organizations are like. Like I said, maybe it's just me that I had the mental image of subpar, sloppy, lousy computers, dimly lit office. And if you are of any caliber chops, there's no reason why you would ever want to work for a nonprofit. I know, shame on me. I know, I'm sorry. But when I visited Hope in 2011, I was utterly blown away. The team was exceedingly hospitable, exceptionally smart, clear pursuit of excellence, and deeply, deeply centered on Christ in their faith. Not sloppy at all. I quickly was drawn to learn more about what this organization was.
And so tell us a little bit about your time with Hope. What did that look like early on in terms of what you were learning from the organization, and a little bit more about the culture and the way that the organization worked as a whole?
Yeah, when I first joined, there was a Pathways Out of Poverty exhibit that at that time, Hope's interview process, they ran people through the exhibit that just basically shared the story of what Hope is doing around the world. And so coming out of that 30-minute exhibit, I was sold. I was sobbing. I was like, sign me up. I, at that time, had left the previous organization. And so I joined Hope as a HR coordinator. So sign me up. I would process benefit forms. I would do I-9 forms and whatever I can do to be part of this organization, I am in. And so one of the things that I was drawn to was just a sense of deep humility. We, whatever organizations we are part of, whether it's for-profit, non-profit, and Hope included, we make mistakes. We step on each other's toes, even if we don't intend to. We sometimes use words that we mean one thing, but mean another thing to someone else. I remember innocently in the past, Hope would refer to some programs that we partner with as our programs, as opposed to making it clear that those are partnered programs, whether it's in the marketing material, annual reports, or other communication pieces. When it was brought to light, I've appreciated and seen Hope as an organization clearly making note, exceptionally being mindful in honoring program partners. The second part to it would be a sense of dignity. As someone who's grown up in Malaysia and have seen Western organizations, whether they are corporations or ministries, at times, as recent as even a month ago, I still cringe at the kind of poverty porn that I encounter in our spaces. Beyond the portrayal of work, I have appreciated the genuine walking alongside of brothers and sisters around the world when we read in scriptures that we are created image of God, that we are image bearers. I've appreciated Hope's commitment and posture of walking long-term with communities in a manner of recognizing that God has been at work in these communities long before we show up. There's strengths, talents, dignity, and leaders that God has raised up. And how might we listen, learn, and walk alongside as brothers and sisters? A phrase or a principle that I've appreciated Hope embodying is, we enter as guests, we co-labor as partners, and we continue as friends with an open-handed posture. So on the open-handed posture front, I would make a couple of notes. Each year during Giving Tuesday, which is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, I've appreciated for the past number of years, Hope would share a blog post that outlines 3-5 number of organizations, nonprofits, that highlighting the work that they're doing. As opposed to often commonly during Giving Tuesday, it's a bit of like, this is our time to shine, give it to us. So again, it's a sense of open-handed posture. I remember that open-handed goal is one that would be included in each staff member, whether you are in the HR department, marketing, fundraising, operations programs, that what does it look like for each team member to have an open-handed goal, to do things within each year that you'll be evaluated for that is not directly tied to your role or Hope International. So I've seen team members on the HR team to say, what does it look like for us to review resumes, share positions, help promote like-minded organizations in those regards?
So Ray, you had this experience in what I would consider to be a very healthy organizational culture in Hope International. And I'm curious, from your experience across multiple organizations, why is organizational culture important? And for donors, givers, people who work in ministry that are maybe seeking a role, or partners, how could they start to understand or evaluate the culture of an organization?
Yeah, it's a big one. It's something that I think about a lot. And I've sometimes talked about culture and branding as two sides of the same coin. And culture is such that it permeates all facets of the organization. You know, you can have a certain marketing scheme, you can hire different things, but unless culture is lived out, it can't be sustained. And sometimes I think about culture as an element where it's such that it's going upstream and it's not hinged on any single person. Culture is such that you sense it, you can see it in people's eyes, you can feel it as you walk into the building. you can decipher it even between the lines in their annual reports on what are the pillars and the values that truly sustains or are truly important beyond what's being actually promoted. And so as it translates, I think pragmatically, I see the impact of culture in board governance. I see the impact of culture in board turnover. I see the impact of culture in employee turnover and employee engagement. I see culture in the way that fundraising events are happening. And so culture is something I think through a lot. I've sometimes been saddened by communities around us, whether it's faith-based or non-faith-based, that we either promote, reward a certain ranking of culture. At times, I've also seen friends being disillusioned upon being part of organizations that are seemingly in high-ranking organizations and wonder what happened here. And on the flip side, I've seen vibrant, robust, flourishing culture that would never even ranks in any ranking reports. And so I go back to how Jesus lived, the movement that Jesus created. I think about the currencies of pride and ego, and sometimes even in the pursuit of doing some of these things, we create a sense of competitiveness that I don't think is the healthiest. So I appreciate organizations that are exceptionally diligent in undergirding a sense of humble, fervent culture that points to Jesus.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're hitting on is that organizations like people to be really like Jesus ultimately often looks like going very against the grain of what the normal kind of draw, for an organization, the kind of things that we think of that you have to do to succeed. It's like everything is backwards, in God's economy. And just like that's true in the personal walk of faith, that sounds like it's just as true in an organization, a living, breathing organism of people joined together and linked by common mission and purpose.
Yeah. Organizational culture, I think part of that, it's you can't fake it, right? Like it's really hard to fake long term, even though you may be using all the right words, or you can even have a really polished PR agency that does all the right hashtags and all the right promo materials. But at the end of the day, unless it's lived out authentically and flow through across the organization, and that's precisely why it's hard. I think, Keelan, you talked about it, that it's a bit of the upside down kingdom, right? That pursuing humility and sacrificial love is hard because every single one of us, we want to pursue our own comfort. We want to pursue our own security. And it is going against the grain in some ways of, no, I want to continue to have a others focused lens of what it means to serve. And that is hard. And so I think that's why at times, whether it's faith-based organizations, for-profit, non-profit, churches, culture requires intentionality and accountability, because sometimes we are biased, or sometimes it's easy to even deceive ourselves, that we are okay, or we are doing this for the right reasons.
Yeah, I want to continue to dig into culture because I know that's a big part of what God has you doing today. But before we get too far off from Hope International, I did want to just come back about a question that kind of comes up from time to time. I have heard both people in the kind of business for-profit space say a lot of what you kind of shared earlier a little while ago, that giving to nonprofits or charities is a way of the past, ineffective, you're always going to require additional funding, that kind of sentiment. And then I've also heard people that are kind of more familiar with the nonprofit style or nonprofit sector say, when you're dealing with profit, it inherently just kind of taints the mission and the purpose and stuff. And a lot of what you've shared is really this beautiful blend of both sides. Obviously, kind of coming into the nonprofit world, but Hope has a solid footing in both sides, doing a lot of microfinance and helping people with general stewardship in general across a lot of different programs and partners. And, just a microfinance model is not a handout model by any kind of means. And so I would love to hear what you would say to each of these groups, those who just can't see a nonprofit model working these days, and those who see, business as inherently broken or tainted in some way.
Yeah, I'll just qualify that these are just kind of my experiences, my thoughts, and my lens through things. As far as charity, relief, donation, nonprofit work goes, man, there is a time and place for that. Absolutely. There are things, initiatives, and efforts that require donations and charities to get after it, that entrepreneurship, commerce, job, just doesn't work. So I think there is a time and place, a sliver for that. At the same time, I think you mentioned it, Keelan, I love when ministries or organizations, nonprofits have a revenue generating arm. There is a self-sustaining manner of which that you are not relying every single year, every single dollar for it to be fundraised. So I love the element of micro enterprise development, that when someone gives to Hope, 97% of repayment rate that recycles back into the system for further loan disbursement. So I love that side of it. On the profit side of it, Bible talks a lot about money. And that's something that I've thought a lot about. And greed, the love of money, Bible is abundantly clear that no, we should be mindful and be wary of greed. Nonetheless, I believe that the role of capital can be unleashed for so much good if we steward it well. And so I think your guys' podcasts have done an amazing job talking about impact investing, patient capital, donor advisory fund. I love the continual maturing of this space that allows for that. And I've seen the impact of that firsthand.
So Ray, currently you're with Rising Sun Consultants. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found that opportunity and the role that you serve in now?
Yeah, I've always believed, sometimes they say, be careful of the kind of friends that you surround yourself with. A number of years ago, a friend prayed over me, and she lives in Madison, Wisconsin. And it turned out to be a 3-hour prayer with her commenting, Ray, I sense the Lord giving me a few words for you. And my response was, I think it's okay. You can keep those words to yourself. And it turned out to be business person, pastor, and social worker. Unbeknownst to her, for a number of years prior, those words had been in my journal, and in fact has been what we use at Hope as the employee profile. To which then she said, Ray, that is God's call for the rest of your life. Search no more. So using my head as a business person, heart of a pastor, and soul of a social worker. So towards the later years of Hope, upon a discernment process with friends and leaders at Hope, praying through the balance of contentment and ambition and a sense of calling. You've already had on this podcast, Peter and Jesse, and I've reported to Jesse the entire time of my Hope tenure. Peter and Jesse both had remarked, at Hope, we raise the banner of Jesus way higher than the banner of hope. To which they meant that if God is calling you somewhere else, your primary allegiance is to obey the Lord. So for then a number of years afterwards, I was part of a fast-growing financial institution in the role of Chief Culture Officer. One of those things that I've continued to observe that seems to derail organizations is the trifecta of board, executive leader, and financial stability. You may have an amazing CRM tool or a wonderful wellness program, heck, even with the most excellent coffee machines or ping pong tables. Yet board disunity, ineffective leader, and poor or unstable financials can severely derail a business or a nonprofit or even a church. So at Rising Sun, we invest in servant leaders who are pursuing purpose-driven impact. And we do it through coaching, training, advisory, consulting support. But that's sort of our heart's DNA. So
tell us a little bit more about that. When you are starting with somebody fresh, what kind of things are you trying to learn about them? And what kind of a journey or destination are you trying to move them towards?
Yeah, so I think it starts with just listening and learning. So on the trifecta that I mentioned about board, effective leader, and financials, whether they are business, nonprofit, or church or ministry, is an assessment through those areas. What's the board health look like? What's the executive leadership health look like? What's the financial health look like? And through that, then depending on where they are and which one, we then help support and dig in. So one of the things that at Rising Sun we think through a lot is under the umbrella of servant leadership. For example, we call it the 5 essence of servant leadership. So as we think through the composition of whether it's board makeup or operational executive health, whether it's leadership team communication or one-on-one meetings, here are the 5 elements that we try to think through it in these lens. 1, a sense of seeking to serve versus being served. So servant leaders who reject the premise that their team exists to serve them. Instead of focusing on their own interests, agendas, or gains, they look for opportunities to elevate and serve those around them. Number 2, a sense of sacrifice over a sense of pursuing my own comfort. So this kind of intentionality means setting aside your own platform and ego. 3, actions over words. So we know the old adage that actions speak louder than words. And if this saying holds true for servant leaders, words matter, don't get me wrong, but servant leaders walk the talk. So again, think through in terms of board, executive leadership, and or even the financial side. 4, open-handed versus tight-fisted. Give the example earlier on kind of Hope's manner of expressing that. But open-handed means freeing leaders to work from a place of abundance rather than assuming a defensive and self-protective posture. Open-handedness invites leaders to see their colleagues or even competitors as collaborators working toward shared goals, that we is greater than just me. And then last but not least, a sense of gratitude over a sense of entitlement. That servant leaders, that we approach talent, success, life, relationships with a sense of gratitude and understanding that all of this is a gift, and reject the idea that life and others owes them something, right? That there's not a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, that's really describing the journey of faith, right? What we are all trying to be, or what God is gradually shaping all of us, often very slowly, into this idea of gratitude, of others-centeredness, and in this idea of almost kind of like faithful risk-taking, right? Not needing to put up so much security walls and defenses around yourself, but to be able to let your guard down and trust God so that you can focus on others. And I can see how a lot of this would naturally bring about a really strong leader who people naturally want to, walk beside and engage with.
Yeah, I was telling Cody earlier on this call that today has just been a crazy day. I just had a marathon meeting between 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock between 2 individuals, 2 abundant, amazing women of faith that is just on fire for the Lord. And so I think about some of these things as, on some ways, we can sometimes think that it just feels so countercultural. On the other hand, I feel like God has continued to at least invite me into this journey of divine treasure hunting, to encounter a number of individuals, communities that are just living this out in a fervent way. And so for me, I think about Rising Sun as we think about investing in leaders, equipping, walking alongside, being the wind in the sails to pursue these purpose-driven impact, to say, yeah, keep going. It seems nuts. It seems countercultural, yet this is worth pursuing.
Ray, a topic that we spent some time on when we recorded an episode around the book Lead with Prayer that seems very relevant in this conversation is a reality that the more you focus on working for God and trying to have an impact through the work that you do, it can leave less space for intimacy with God. And in that book, there was an observable trend that the leaders who seemed to be having the most impact tended to reduce the amount of time they were spending in prayer. And they highlighted some examples where that was actually healthy and where that was unhealthy. How do you recommend that leaders prioritize intimacy with God even as their schedule fills up and as they have competing priorities?
Yeah. Instead of prescribing advice, oh man, this is starting to feel a bit like therapy, but I'll just perhaps maybe share some of my own journey and in some ways kind of like coming clean. So in around 2018, 2019, I've often prided myself as being approachable, maybe even responsible and or high performing. And what that eventually translated into was an atrocious sense of daily habits. Because of supporting programs in different time zones, I would often wake up at 3 or 4 a.m., working, whether it's on empty stomach or at times pumping in a couple cups of coffee. I know, Dr. Keelan, don't judge me. And not grabbing my first bite until sometime mid-afternoon. And that eventually came to a grinding halt a number of months when I was supporting a staff member who was involved in a severe automobile accident and needed to be airlifted home back to the US. For months thereafter, I subconsciously wrestled with nagging questions. Was this my fault? Could I have prevented this? Did I do enough? And months later, it resulted in heart palpitation, massive headaches. And what was worse was every waking moment was a sense of I'm not doing enough and maybe even a sense of failure. This wasn't good. It was affecting my health. It was affecting my relationships with my loved ones. And I was in a pretty dark place. And so there is a real struggle. And I would admit and confess that, yeah, in those moments, I struggled praying. I've not only struggled, I've neglected praying. And I had no one to blame other than it was a negligence on my part. It wasn't that anyone was holding these kind of quote unquote work responsibilities over me, yet somehow I kind of fallen into it. So the sense of feeling torn between output and intimacy with God, it is real.
Yeah, and at the same time, I know you've spoken before about this idea of a white space, silence, Sabbath, some of the practices that actually I feel like we are hearing a lot more about as they cross over with the generosity space. It seems like every other episode blurs into this idea of rest and kind of recentering, almost as like another branch of generosity. But I'd love to hear what some of that has looked like in your journey and how you think through some of those practices.
Yeah, I think even in sharing through some of that, right? Like at the end of the day, it is an issue of identity. You know, like, do I truly believe that the more I work, the more I can advance the mission? Or do I truly believe that God is at work here? So in our culture that oftentimes maybe reward, incentivize, or perhaps even idolizes productivity, efficiency, and accomplishments, man, like I know I have felt guilty taking time off. At times, maybe even not guilty. It's just easier to keep working because I get recognized. And maybe even, we say phrases like, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm just so busy, right? Like we hold it up as a plaque unto others. So I have been guilty of that. And heck, I sometimes still struggle with it. Pragmatically, on the white space portion, I dedicate a day a week to truly rest, keeping the Sabbath, right? Like not just taking Sunday off, right? But Sabbath keeping, taking one day rest and acknowledge that God is the God of Sabbath. I also try to practice a day each quarter of silence and solitude. And then I would encourage a week each year to disconnect from technology. We are just so prone and so tethered to our notifications. And so just remembering what it means to be human being and not human doing. I try to just give myself permission to be about more than work. No matter how compelling the mission that I'm working towards, I strive to remember and accept or even embrace my own limitations. I know I will sometimes still make a mess of things, let people down, or be unable to help despite my best intentions, but I'm learning to accept this, though it remains a struggle. I used to believe the lie that I am what I perform, and I don't think I'm alone in this, but I'm learning to believe the truth that I am loved by the Creator, and that alone is enough.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I have found the same to be true, that as I lean into rest, somehow, even though I can't account for it, the right things get done well. You know, it's like that shouldn't be surprising to someone who has this rhythm, but I found that to be pretty counterintuitive. But for someone who has not adopted a practice of rest and these kind of rhythms into their own life, it can be really hard to think about, what am I not going to do? What can I put down? Do you have any suggestions for someone who wants to adopt a practice of rest but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah, so I'll share a quote and then three things: a book, an app, an activity. So the quote is by Eugene Peterson. Sabbath is that uncluttered time and space in which we can distance ourselves from our own activities enough to see what God is doing. A book, John Mark Comer, Practicing the Way. So I would encourage folks who want to cultivate a sense of rest to give it a shot. That is a book to recommend. An app, Lectio 365. Lectio is spelled Lectio. Lectio 365 is a daily devotional app that invites you to pause in the presence of God and create space for prayer. And then the activity is what I refer to as breathing prayer. So in some of my lower moments when I was struggling with a sense of identity or even with struggling through prayer, just try for 3 minutes, take deep breaths, repeat, savor, and meditate on perhaps this verse: "Be still and know that I am God." Just 3 minutes, deep breaths, and repeat that verse. Hold that in your head and in your heart.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I will add to your list The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, also by John Mark Comer. That book really blew up my life a lot. And I have read it multiple times since then. And I can't remember if that or Practicing the Way came first or second, but both very powerful, especially if the idea of rest is totally unfamiliar. If that's like you have no framework for that, he has an amazing way of putting that into context.
Yeah, one last thing about rest too, like sometimes I just feel convicted that like if God of the universe, if Jesus took time off to retreat, man, like do I think that I'm more busy than Jesus, that I'm more important than God, that I have no time for rest, that I can move the mountains, that I can advance the mission of the organization? Again, right, it goes back to a sense of identity complex, right? And so, yeah. So Lord, forgive me for moments that I think that I do not need rest, that I think that I'm more important than I really am.
Yeah, amen to that. And that is one I feel like God is still slowly and gently and kindly beating into my head. So I have a long way to go, but fortunately, he's very gracious. Now,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Ray, I know in 2021, you went through a major decision process around kind of a very personal decision in your life. And I'd love if you could kind of break down a little of the context of what that process looked like.
Yeah, so in 2021, well, let me just run through a few timelines. So March 30th, 2021, I was rolled in with 2 kidneys into the operating room and was rolled out with 1 kidney. So surgery finally happened on March 30th, 2021. I first learned about my father-in-law needing a kidney the summer of 2020. So as you are tracking through the dates, you may remember that 2020, end of it, earlier 2021, that's COVID timeframe. So surgery was scheduled, postponed for at least 3 times due to COVID hospital situation, life-threatening procedures only. And so each time I had pre-op testing and education done, EKG, blood tests, so on and so forth. I think, of course, going into a procedure like this, there's natural and understandable questions and concerns, and I shared those as well. Is it safe? Am I doing the right thing? Am I being responsible? How long will I be out for? What happens if I develop complications myself or during surgery, or perhaps even 5 years down the road? What if? At the same token, maybe it's just the way I'm wired. It didn't take long for me to say, yeah, I'm in. Like any diligent business student, I did my due diligence and research, and here are just some stats. There are more than 100,000 people waiting for life-saving organ transplant in the US. Roughly 13 people die each day. Did you catch that? 13 die each day while waiting for a life-saving kidney transplant. And we walk around with the cure inside our bodies. The success rate for kidney transplant for living kidney donors was reported at 97%. And so as I look through it, and one of the things you've learned about me is that I enjoy and love a 2x2 matrix, right? So the ability to help and how critical is the need. And in this situation, it's up and to the right, high ability to help and a high need. And so through God's grace, and through non-doing of any of my own, I did not earn healthy kidney. I did not earn or plan for a matching blood type or a tissue or size compatibility. I did not earn my physical, mental, emotional health that allows me to donate the kidney. I did not earn a healthy, amazing marriage with my wife, Heather, whose dad could use a kidney. So if God or whatever higher force that have orchestrated such an opportunity, I am in. I think furthermore, as we think through scripture, the clearest one for me is just, if you have 2 coats, give one away. And so Heather and I, my wife, joked that year we happened to have picked give generously as a theme for our family in 2020, not knowing what we would have been called to do. And so one of the things that I've often talked to, as a family in our family with our kids is we love God and we want our actions to show it. So, John 13:35, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciple if you love one another. And so for me as a Christ follower, it's a simple gesture of obedience in pursuing a life of stewardship and generosity. So I don't often talk about this. And in fact, I probably struggle telling my journey and story of kidney donation because I do not want it to be about me. And I sure don't want any sense of like, wow, Ray, you did such an heroic, selfless deed. But I've also appreciated, I think in a number of the podcasts on Finish Line, whether it's Caleb Brickey or Kate Gardner or Ellen Barnhart, Dana Wickerman, like just a reminder and maybe a conviction that stewarding our story and how God works in our lives matter. And so I appreciate you bringing it up. I'm learning how to be better at sharing this chapter of my life.
I think you touched on some really core aspects of just kind of exploring what generosity can look like for each of us. And I was just reflecting on a passage from 2 Corinthians that basically says, give as you're able, give according to your means. Don't give according to what you don't have. But I think generosity tends to lead us to think about money and how do we give money that we don't need. That your story of sharing a kidney that you are actively using, that you could argue you did need and you probably valued highly as part of your functioning healthy body, it feels like the expression of generosity in giving up something like that is really challenging. I think that's tapping into kind of more of a sacrificial expression of generosity. Whereas, a lot of our discussion around financial finish lines involves quantifying what you don't need so that you can be free to deploy that. But the other side of the conversation of what does it look like to give up something that you do need. There's a new level of challenge in that.
Yeah. I mean, even as you say that, Cody, and then I'm not being self-deprecating or even downplaying it, I really don't think it was that big of a deal. And maybe, Keelan, you can share more about how the amazing, miraculous way that God has designed body. Like, I've learned since then through the kidney donation process that the remaining kidney enlarges in size and is operating at a capacity that it was more efficient than prior. I'm like, what on earth? How does God do this? Right? Like, and I'm by no means a crazy athlete or whatever, but like, I still run several miles a day, and I don't run every day, but like, I'm still able to do most of life functioning. I swim, I run, I go on hikes, and for most day-to-day stuff, I don't feel any impediment. And so, again, I don't think everyone needs to be called to give up your kidney, but as for me anyway, man, like, what an honor to be able to be a answer to prayer in that regard. And I've also learned about the wonderful part about dialysis and so on and so forth, but a living kidney donor, even as compared to what's the term they use? Non-living
Cadaveric
kidney? Yeah. That it actually performs better for the recipient. And so, again, like, praise be to the Lord, the way that He's designed our bodies. And so I see just what a glimpse into God's kingdom, into God's design, that at least for me to be in this manner of being a blessing to my father-in-law. And maybe this is another tidbit. I don't know if this is helpful or not. Like, because I'm an idiot, so I asked the surgeon, I'm like, hey, I'm Asian. He's a white guy. Does it matter? It's like, yeah, kidney is a kidney. And so, again, how amazing, and like that these things all match, right? Like that we have the power of advancement in medical field. And so I don't take any of that for granted. And truly, when they say it's more blessed to give than to receive, I've walked through this in that very sense, that what a blessing to be able to, I've been so much more blessed in this journey than to have given. So.
Yeah, powerful story. And there's so many different dynamics about giving financially or in any other way. But one that I'm curious to hear what was like for you in this experience is what your conversation with God was through this process. Both, I mean, it sounds like you had a lot of time to think about it with getting delayed multiple times. What was it like when you first kind of heard about the need at all and were kind of wrestling through, obviously the practical side, that, that makes sense, but on a spiritual side, like, what was the conversation with God like? And then, all the way up to like the day before the surgery, and then in the time afterwards or since, how have you seen that affect your degree of faith or trust, or even your ability to kind of discern where God is leading you? This is a major decision you're walking through with God.
Whether I talked about the blood type match or the tissue or the size compatibility, I saw God's hand in it, and I don't want to over spiritualize any of that. Even there were several family members that went through the testings of, blood type and so on and so forth. They were ruled out. So I think in a way, I saw a sense of like how communities came together in helping in that journey. Personally, I had some close ones that actually discouraged me and had perhaps not the most supportive words, where more or less cautioning, is this the most responsible thing to do? So those moments were hard as we kind of process through that. Yet I'm just grateful that there was an overwhelming sense of just feeling called and feeling that this is the right step to take. I remember having a conversation with my wife, Heather. She was at the hospital with me the morning of, where her dad's rolled in while I was rolled in. And so I can only imagine what it was like for her. And in fact, March 30th is also my daughter's birthday. And so I mentioned to my daughter that says like, I'll see you. Sorry, I won't be able to spend your birthday with you, but I'll see you afterwards. Right. And so it just was a very vivid reminder that, like, for me anyway, our life is not our own. When we surrender to the Lord, that we ought to live a surrendered life of obedience, that we ought to be just this gigantic neon signpost that points to Jesus. And not in any reckless, irresponsible kind of way, but that our words, our actions, our life should tell a story of Jesus. That when others encounter it, that should beg a question of, man, what is going on? That there's something bigger in that person's life beyond what they are about. And my hope is that when others see and hear and learn about some of this, that it points to the God that we worship.
Well, Ray, you've had such an incredible number of experiences, and you've walked alongside leaders, and you've led yourself, and you and I got to know each other through the Redemptive Leadership Summit that you put on, which is incredible. And I learned that you have amazing friends all over the world. God's led you through such an incredible journey. What are you most excited about when you think about the next 5 to 10 years?
So if it's okay, I actually going to push your timeline out like maybe 30 to 50 years. As I think about the faith and work conversations, as I think about the generosity conversation, as I think about, things like when helping herds and walking alongside communities in development, I've just had a great deal of admiration, respect for the ones that have moved the needle. I think about Henry Nouwen. I think about Dallas Willard. I think about Tim Keller. They have shifted the conversations, the secular sacred divide. And these are some of the voices that have helped move the conversation along. I think about some of those that have also continued to foster and deepen these, again, right, conversations around faith and work, generosity, and coming alongside to serve the marginalized, the vulnerable. I think about Andy Crouch. Think about Julie Wilson, Ellen Barnhart, Dana Wickerman, right? And a number of these have been on this podcast. So what am I excited about for the next 30 to 50 years is the next generation. So Cody Hobelman, right? I love that. I love this podcast. I think about Kate Garner. I think about a number of others that are continuing to hold up the flag to say, yeah, this matters. Whether it's a sense of servant leadership matters, a sense of God is alive and well. And what does it look like to serve and be generous and walk alongside communities in a way that we can point towards God to see redemptive purposes and part of the renewal of the culture around us? I'm excited about the global church, that these are examples and stories, to your point, Cody, that it's not just here in the US, it's all around the world, that they are examples of vibrant faith. And we are seeing, partnering, and walking alongside firsthand. And we are better because of that. And so I'm excited to be a small, tiny puzzle piece in the grand scheme of how God is weaving together the tapestry of redeeming the world.
God is certainly on the move right now, and there is so much happening if you just open your eyes to it. And you are right in the intersection of a whole lot of it. And so I'm sure you get to see all kinds of ways that God is working through all kinds of people. As we get to the end of the episode, I did want to leave some time for our Manager's Minute. We just like to end every episode with a practical suggestion for how our listeners can step into their role as stewards and manage God's wealth wisely. So, Ray, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
Yeah, perhaps I would encourage us to be thinking about what it means to steward our stories, our experiences, and our relationships. We all have experiences in our faith journey and our relationships. And so every single one of us, be kind, be generous, and be a good steward of these things that God has given us. Whatever it may be, whether it's with a neighbor or a high school student who's struggling with mental health, or with a widow who's grieving the loss of a loved one, or perhaps a friend who has unexpectedly lost their job. How might we steward our story, our experiences, and relationship in a way that helps point others to Jesus? Pragmatically, I would just perhaps suggest to do a review of our calendar and our bank account in the last 30 days. And just have an honest review and self-assessment. Is it indicative of the person and the values that we hold? And my goal and desire for myself is that perhaps it lends to generosity, and kindness and love, that we are able to live a life and a testimony that points to the Lord. I would probably just share one last quote. I don't know, maybe I'm just like quote heavy here. So quote is that you can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I don't know how you say his last name. Hopefully I'm not butchering it too much, but you can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him.
Well, Ray, as always, it has been such a pleasure and joy spending some time with you. And I'm so glad we could hit record and share some of your stories with our listeners here. But thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Yeah, maybe if you may, I would flip one quick second around and say, how can we pray for you? How can we serve you as you've continued to crank out these amazing podcasts episode after episode? What can we do as listeners and audiences, the way that we can pray for you and we can serve you?
That's a great question, and not one we've been asked live on the podcast before. We have had the privilege over the last 5 years or so of hearing from so many. You named like 100 people in this episode alone that we've been able to talk to. And I think it has given us a good benchmark for like, what is the cutting edge of what God is doing in the world right now? And you mentioned so many different ways that he's working. And my prayer is that we would continue to push that boundary of just what is possible. Many people have shared something along the lines of asking for something bigger than we could possibly accomplish on our own. And that's my prayer, not just for this little podcast, but for everything that God is doing right now, that we would see things that only he could accomplish. And if this podcast can be one small link in connecting one person to another who need to be connected, or having one person get that spark or idea from someone else's story, then we are grateful to be one little link in that chain. But to the degree that I think we get to see God do God-sized things that we could never do on our own, that's where I'm most excited to watch.
Yeah, praying for Ephesians 3:20. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. What about you, Cody?
Yeah, the thing that I feel like the Lord is really communicating strongly in this season, and my prayer for anyone who would hear this conversation, is that we wouldn't just be filling ourselves with knowledge and wisdom and inspiration, but that it would move us to response, that the gospel would permeate our head, our heart, and our hands, and that it would be evident in the walk, not just the talk. So we love hearing stories like yours, and we love discovering how the Holy Spirit would instruct us and lead us to respond when we feel inspired, when we feel convicted. And that would be my prayer, that we would never lose that two-way communication with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, so good. Thank you. Just to say thanks on behalf of, I know, many listeners, what you guys doing is amazing. It matters. It's worth pursuing. And I appreciate what you guys are investing in this. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you, Ray, for joining us. This has been a real pleasure. And I'm excited to see what God does next.
All right.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 167. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A financial finish line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for you and your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. And step 3, after 90 days, explore the million ways you can use that margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next time.